Picture the smell of a mixture of damp coats with floor polish and overboiled cabbage that hit you the moment you walked through those double doors. It's 12:15 lunchtime, and you're standing in line clutching a segmented plastic tray that's still wet from being washed, waiting for your turn. Ahead of you, the formidable women in floral hairnets stand behind a stainless steel counter like guards watching over the gates. One of them lifts a giant metal spoon and plonks a scoop of something brown and glistening onto the plate in front of you. You don't know what it is, she doesn't know what it is, but you'll eat it anyway because there's no alternative, and if you don't finish it, there's no pudding. This was the British school dinner, a gauntlet of grease and sugar that shaped an entire generation. We survived it, we remember it, and today we're looking at 10 school dinners that wouldn't just be frowned upon now, they'd be actually illegal. Let's start with the legend and the icon that defined school dinners for an entire generation. Turkey Twizzlers. If you went to school any time in the 1990s or early 2000s, you knew them, those spiral-shaped bright orange pieces of meat that sat on your plate like little edible springs. They were crunchy on the outside, disturbingly soft on the inside, and they tasted of salt, fat, and something vaguely poultry-adjacent. Children loved them, parents tolerated them, and Jamie Oliver absolutely hated them. Here is the truth: they contained about 30% turkey. The other 70% was water, pork fat, and a cocktail of additives with names you couldn't pronounce. Flavor enhancers, color stabilizers, and emulsifiers. Each Twizzler contained more salt than a child should consume in an entire day. The fat content was astronomical, and the nutritional value is essentially zero. But they were cheap, and they were easy to cook. Just bung them in the oven for 20 minutes, and the kids would eat them without complaint. This, for the dinner ladies who deal with hundreds of children, was worth its weight in gold. Turkey Twizzlers became the poster child for everything wrong with school meals. When Jamie Oliver launched his Feed Me Better campaign in 2005, he held one up on television, dissected it, explained exactly what was in it, and the nation collectively recoiled. By 2006, they were effectively banned, not explicitly made illegal, but the new nutritional standards for school meals meant they couldn't meet the requirements. The company that made them tried reformulating, but it wasn't the same. The original Turkey Twizzler, the bright orange monstrosity we all remember, was gone. And honestly, kids mourned them, because for all their horror, they were familiar and edible. Infinitely better than what came before. Before Turkey Twizzlers, there was the Spam fritter, the ultimate working-class delicacy that defined school dinners in the 1960s and 70s. That canned, gelatinous, salty block of ham that came in a tin with a key is the heaviest, greasiest batter you can imagine. It would arrive on your plate glistening with oil, the batter so thick and heavy it absorbed grease like a sponge. One bite, and your mouth would be coated with a film of fat that wouldn't go away no matter how much water you drank. The Spam fritter was served with chips, also deep-fried, obviously, and maybe some tinned marrow-fat peas that were grey-green and tasted of nothing. It was a meal designed not for nutrition, but for filling up hungry children as cheaply as possible. And it worked. You'd eat it and feel immediately heavy and sluggish, then spend the afternoon sitting at your desk feeling like you'd swallowed a brick. The salt content alone would make modern nutritionists weep. A single Spam fritter could contain over 2 grams of sodium, an entire day's worth for an adult, never mind a child. Today, serving something like that would violate about 6 different nutritional regulations, but back then it was Friday's lunch, and you ate it without question. And then there was the mystery meat stew, served from giant silver vats that looked like they belonged in an industrial kitchen or possibly a prison. This was a watery brown gravy containing cubes of meat that could have come from any animal or possibly several animals combined. The meat was gristle-heavy, impossible to chew, requiring you to either swallow it whole or spit it discreetly into a napkin when the dinner lady wasn't looking. The gravy was salty, thin, and somehow greasy at the same time, with a layer of orange oil floating on top that would coat your tongue. You'd poke at the meat cubes with your fork, trying to identify something recognizable, but there was nothing. Just brown, fibrous chunks suspended in brown liquid. Sometimes there were carrots, boiled into submission until they were translucent. Sometimes there were potatoes. The whole thing was served with a ladle that had been stirring that vat since morning, and you'd watch the dinner lady dig deep, bringing up sediment from the bottom like she was dredging a harbor. The stew would be plopped onto your plate, where it would immediately start spreading, a brown tide invading every compartment of your segmented tray. But the mains were only half the horror. The sides were often worse than the main course itself. Take mashed potatoes. Except it wasn't mashed potato, not really. It was smashed, dehydrated potato flakes, reconstituted with hot water and possibly some butter if you were lucky. They would be in enormous quantities, mixing the powder with water in industrial-sized pots until it reached the consistency of wallpaper paste. Then they'd serve it with an ice cream scoop, creating perfect, unnaturally smooth domes of potato that sat on your plate without moving. The texture was wrong. The taste was bland, vaguely potato-flavored, but mostly just starchy and chemical. You'd try to mash it with your fork to make it look more real, but it would just compress, becoming denser and heavier. And if you let it sit too long, it would form a skin on top. Nobody enjoyed smash-mashed potatoes. You tolerated it because it was there, and covering it in gravy made it slightly more bearable. And the vegetables, dear God, the vegetables. Cabbage that had been boiled for so long it had lost all color and all nutritional value, turning into a translucent mush that smelled like someone had left eggs to rot in a sewer. But the dinner ladies weren't being deliberately cruel. They were just following instructions from an era that believed vegetables needed to be cooked until they surrendered completely, until every vitamin had been boiled out into the water, which was then thrown away. The gravy was supposed to save everything, supposed to make the whole meal palatable by covering it in a thick brown sauce that would mask the flavors of everything else. But the gravy itself was a problem, lumpy, salty beyond reason, and with a consistency somewhere between soup and cement. It was made from granules mixed with water and left to thicken until it reached a texture that would coat your spoon and refuse to drip off. The salt content was phenomenal. One serving of gravy could contain half your daily sodium allowance, and inevitably it would leak into the pudding section, contaminating your dessert before you'd even started your main course. You'd lift your tray and see gravy in the corner where your sponge cake was supposed to sit pristine and untouched, and you'd know that today's pudding would taste faintly of beef stock, no matter what you did. But pudding. If the main course was something to endure, pudding was your reward, your reason for eating the mystery meat and the cabbage mush. Except pudding in British schools wasn't exactly what you'd call healthy, or even particularly pleasant. It was just different, a change in flavor profile from savory horror to sweet horror. Pink custard was everywhere. It came in enormous metal jugs, thick and lukewarm, a chemical pink color that supposedly indicated strawberry flavoring, but actually tasted of something that had never been near a strawberry in its life. The custard was poured over everything, creating a sweet, gloopy coating that was simultaneously too thin and too thick. If you left it sitting too long, it would form a skin on top. Some kids loved the skin. They'd carefully peel it off and eat it separately, treating it like a delicacy. Most of us hated it, gagging at the texture, at the way it felt wrong in your mouth. But you'd eat the custard anyway because after the salt and grease of the main course, your body craved sugar, and because the alternative was often worse. Chocolate concrete was a legend among school puddings, and not in a good way. It was chocolate-flavored, technically, but the chocolate taste was overwhelmed by sweetness and something vaguely chemical. The texture was the real problem. It's not cake-like or brownie-like, but somehow compressed, as if someone had taken chocolate cake mix, removed all the air, and compressed it under hydraulic pressure until it became a solid block. It would be cut into squares and served with custard. The custard was supposed to soften it, but mostly it just sat on top in a puddle while you tried to break off pieces of the concrete with your spoon. Each bite was a challenge. You'd get a chunk in your mouth and have to work at it, chewing and chewing until it finally broke down enough to swallow. And then it would sit in your stomach like actual concrete, heavy and immovable, making you regret every decision that led to this moment. Semolina was another classic, a grainy, milky sludge that was somehow both too thick and too thin, served in bowls with a spoonful of jam on top that was supposed to make it appealing, but mostly just made it look like something medical. The texture was gritty and unpleasant, with little granules that never quite dissolved. You'd stir it, trying to mix the jam through to add some flavor, but the jam would just swirl in streaks, never fully incorporating. Eating semolina required determination and a willingness to not think too hard about what you were doing. You'd take a spoonful, close your eyes, and swallow quickly, trying to avoid the texture. But worse than semolina was frog spawn, the school dinner nickname for tapioca pudding. The name was perfect because that's exactly what it looked like. Translucent pearls suspended in milky liquid, each pearl with a darker center, looking for all the world like the spawn of frogs sitting in a bowl waiting to be eaten. The texture was the stuff of nightmares. The pearls were soft, slippery, bursting in your mouth with a slightly gritty center. Some kids couldn't even look at it without gagging. Others developed elaborate techniques for eating it without actually tasting it. Teachers would insist it was good for you and full of nutrients. But that didn't make it any easier to eat. You'd sit there staring into your bowl at those translucent spheres, psyching yourself up for the ordeal, while the dinner lady watched to make sure you at least attempted. Some kids would hide spoonfuls in their napkins. Others would accidentally knock their bowl onto the floor. The truly desperate would eat it one pearl at a time, prolonging the agony, but making each individual horror more manageable. And then there was jam roly-poly, a heavy, sweat-based sponge rolled up with a smear of jam inside. It's often served in thick slices that sit on your plate like something geological. This was proper old-fashioned British pudding, the kind that coal miners would have eaten to fuel a day underground. Except you weren't a coal miner, you were a child, and you'd just eaten mystery meat stew and overboiled cabbage, and now you had to consume what was essentially a lead weight disguised as dessert. Teachers wondered why children were sluggish after lunch, why they couldn't concentrate during afternoon lessons. The answer was that they'd just eaten the equivalent of a construction material covered in sugar, but the food itself was only part of the school dinner experience. The atmosphere, the environment, and the people, they all contributed to making it memorable. For all the wrong reasons. The dinner ladies were formidable women who'd seen it all and took no nonsense from anyone. And if you didn't finish your plate, if you tried to leave vegetables or push the gristle to the side, they'd notice. No pudding until you've eaten your greens was the law. They'd stand there, arms folded, watching you struggle through cold peas and limp cabbage, unmoved by your suffering. Some dinner ladies were kind, would slip you an extra sausage, or pretend not to notice when you fed your sprouts to the bin, but most were hard, worn down by years of serving hundreds of ungrateful children, and they had no sympathy left to give. The plastic trays were another nightmare, segmented like TV dinners, with compartments for main sides and pudding. They were supposed to keep everything separate. They never did. The gravy would leak from the main section into the vegetables, the custard would seep backward from the pudding into the main. You'd end up with a tray where everything tasted of everything else, your sponge cake flavored with beef gravy, your mashed potato contaminated with pink custard, and at every table there'd be one plastic jug of lukewarm water and a stack of scratched plastic cups that multiple children would share. The water would sit there, room temperature, sometimes with bits of food floating in it from someone's dirty hands. You'd pour yourself a cup and drink it anyway because you were thirsty, because the salty food made you desperate for liquid, and because there was no alternative. Nobody thought about hygiene, nobody worried about germs. You just drank from the communal jug and hoped for the best. So why would all of this be illegal today? Because in 2006, after Jamie Oliver's campaign exposed just how terrible school meals had become, the government introduced strict nutritional standards. These weren't suggestions, they were legal requirements that schools had to meet. Salt, sugar, and saturated fat were all limited. Schools had to provide fresh fruit and vegetables at every meal. Processed meat had to meet minimum meat content requirements, which immediately eliminated Turkey Twizzlers and similar products. Deep-fried food could also only be served twice a week, maximum, and sugar puddings were restricted to small portions or banned entirely in some areas. So here's the question. What was your worst school dinner? Was it the spam fritter that sat in your stomach like a stone? The semolina you couldn't finish, no matter how hard you tried? Or the Turkey Twizzler you actually enjoyed and still miss to this day? Drop your memories in the comments. Share this with someone who survived British school dinners.